Hello everyone, my name is David. Today we are going to take a look at another real story with you. It is said that DNA is something that can never lie or deceive. DNA is the key that can solve even the most complicated, unsolved cases. In fact, in the US, a 50-year-old cold case was solved solely because of DNA technology. DNA is the one thing that helps solve many cases, and it often becomes the most powerful weapon in getting someone convicted. But what if I told you that the same DNA can deceive? That because of a DNA report, the police let the killer go, never even reached the killer, and the identity of the victim remains unknown? What would you say then? And not just once, but twice. DNA deceives. Can DNA really mislead us? It's a strange thing because it shouldn't be possible. Every person born on this earth has a unique DNA. No two people have the same, so it can't just match someone else's. Today's story is an incredible police investigation. We often complain about the police, but there are some officers who truly use their brains to solve a case. In Madhya Pradesh, there's a place called Damo. In this area, in 2023, there lived a family consisting of a husband, wife, and their son. The son's name was Jairaj. Jairaj was in the 10th grade. The parents were well off. The father owned property worth millions, land, flats, and other assets. On the evening of March 28, 2023, Jairaj went out to play in his village where he lived. But after going out to play, he never returned home. Evening turned to night and his family grew worried. He didn't come back all night. This happened on March 28, 2023. They searched everywhere but couldn't find him, not even with his friends. On March 29, 2023, the family, now very worried, went to the police station and filed a missing person report for their son. The police took the report and began the search. When 2 or 3 days pass without any trace of him, the family begins to suspect that he might have been kidnapped, but they don't receive any ransom call. The police register a kidnapping case and begin their investigation. Days go by, but there is still no clue about Jairaj. During this time, the parents make their own efforts. They announce a reward of $500K, saying that anyone who provides information or a lead about their son will be given $500K in cash. But even that doesn't help. After March 28th, the entire month of April passes with no sign of Jairaj. May arrives, and still no trace of him. And then comes the date, May 14. That means Jairaj had been missing since around March 28th, more than a month and a half. On that day, in a field in Damo, some people passing by notice a skeleton. They inform the police. The police arrive at the scene. Now, a skeleton is found, and Jairaj is still missing. The police begin to suspect, what if this skeleton is his? Some clothes and a belt are also found near the skeleton, wrapped around it. The police immediately call Jairaj's parents and ask them to come to the scene. When the parents arrive and see the skeleton, they notice the torn shirt and pants wrapped around it. And when they see that belt, both parents break down in tears and say, "This is my son, Jairaj." The police now believe that Jairaj, who had been missing and was the subject of a kidnapping case, is dead. So they take the skeleton into their custody. The family pleads, asking the police to hand over the remains so they can perform the last rites of their only son. But the police are bound by procedure. Just the parents' identification and the presence of the belt and clothes are not enough for them to officially confirm that the skeleton belongs to Jairaj. Legally, it was necessary to confirm the identity, and that legal confirmation could only happen if the DNA from the skeleton matched the DNA samples of Jairaj's parents. So, blood samples were taken from the parents, and then both the skeleton and the parents' samples were sent to the forensic science lab. Until then, the police said they could not hand over the skeleton unless it was proven to be Jairaj's. When the samples reached the lab and the DNA report came back from the forensic lab, the results were shocking. It was that report. The parents didn't know how to react, whether to feel relieved or heartbroken, because the DNA report said that the skeleton was not Jairaj's. It belonged to someone else, as the DNA didn't match that of his parents. Now the police suspected that maybe there had been a mistake at the forensic science lab in a small place, and that further confirmation was needed. Meanwhile, the parents were pleading, saying, "Catch our son's killer." A skeleton had been found, but the police couldn't even confirm if it was their son's. The grieving parents were wandering from place to place, seeking answers. The police then said, "Let's do one thing." This time, instead of sending the DNA samples to same lab, the samples were sent to some of the country's most renowned forensic laboratories, one of them being the Chandigarh Forensic Lab, which is among the most reputed labs in India. So, after the initial testing in previous lab, the Damo police sent the blood samples of the parents, along with the skeleton samples, to the Chandigarh Forensic Lab, hoping that this time the matter would be definitively resolved. While they waited for the results, the parents continued to plead with the authorities to catch their son's killer. Some time passed and the DNA report finally came from the Chandigarh Forensic Science Lab to the Damo police. Coincidentally, the result was the same as the one from the previous forensic lab. That is, the skeleton was not Jairaj's. It belonged to someone else because the DNA did not match his parents. Now, the police were confused about what to do next. Meanwhile, the parents insisted, saying, "Do one thing. Give us our son's belt and clothes. We know they're his. I bought them for him," the father said, "and they're still lying in your custody. He was our only son. At the very least, please give us his remains. You already have the samples, so that we can perform his last rites and finally find peace, and so that our son's soul can also be at peace," they said. But the police kept refusing, saying, "How can we hand over the skeleton when the identity is still not confirmed? And if it's not Jairaj, then whose is it? We need to find that out." 2 separate DNA tests had already been done. Meanwhile, the family continued putting pressure on the police, but they couldn't reach a conclusion about what to do. During this time, the SHO of the police station and the SP in charge were transferred. New officers were posted there, and once they arrived, their attention turned to this case. They studied the entire case thoroughly. After reviewing it, they realized that the parents are not wrong. If the belt had belonged to someone else, it wouldn't have been stuck to or embedded in the skeleton like that, especially since the skeleton was over a month and a half old. Even the pieces of clothing weren't the kind that someone could have brought in place there afterward. Now, the question was, at the time of death, if it was murder, were the clothes and belt put on after the killing? And secondly, what came out through the initial judgment based on the DNA? It was also discovered that the age of the deceased was approximately between 15 to 18 years. Jairaj was also in that same age range. All these factors were matching. So, after thoroughly studying the entire case, they questioned why the DNA wasn't matching. They said, "Let's do some more questioning." Until now, no one had thought of this, because DNA either matches or it doesn't. It should confirm whether the child belongs to the parents or not. Then, when this thought struck them, they went back to the parents and questioned them again. They asked, "Tell us, why is the DNA sample not matching? Even from 2 places, the Sagar Forensic Lab and the Chandigarh Lab, the DNA didn't match, and yet you're claiming he's your son. So what could be the reason for this?" they asked. "Okay, tell us, when and where was he born?" Their minds were racing with all sorts of possibilities. Could it be that the baby was born in a hospital and there was a mix-up? This has happened before in hospitals in some countries. The police started thinking along those lines, suspecting something was off. Because they also truly believed that the parents were telling the truth, and they also believed that the skeleton was Jairaj's. But the DNA didn't match. So what was the reason? So when they asked this question, no police officer had thought to ask before. They realized it had never even come up. They asked, when was he born? Where was he born? That's when the parents shared a piece of information they had never revealed before. They said, actually, we had been married for a long time but couldn't have children. We prayed at many places, tried everything, but nothing worked. Then someone told us about a new technology in science called IVF, or test tube baby. With IVF, either by using someone else's sperm or one from the parents, a child can be conceived. They said, we went to an IVF center in Indore, where they did all the necessary checkups. And then in 2009, through the test tube technique, we had a son. That's Jairaj. In other words, Jairaj was not born from his mother's womb in the natural way. He was a test tube baby conceived through IVF. When this fact came to light, the police officer was stunned and realized this might be why the DNA isn't matching. Then, on their own level, the police obtained the address of that IVF center in Indore and went there. They explained the entire situation and asked, a child was born through IVF at your center in 2009. Can you tell us the name of the sperm donor? Now, IVF centers across the country follow very strict regulations. One of the main rules is that they will never disclose the identity of the donor under any circumstances. There are many sensitive reasons for this. What if the child finds out later who their biological father is? It could cause serious emotional complications. So in a way, that policy is understandable. The IVF center firmly refused, politely saying that they are bound by legal and ethical guidelines and therefore cannot disclose the donor's identity. But it was now confirmed that Jairaj was a test tube baby born through IVF, and that was the reason his DNA didn't match his parents. Then the police officer began to wonder, if Jairaj was indeed born through IVF and raised by this family all these years, is there still a way to confirm that he truly lived with them and was their son in every sense, even if not genetically? Because, as I said in the beginning, there has to be someone's DNA, but since the IVF center refused to share it, the sample wasn't available, and no one could say whose biological son he was. Even the parents didn't know who the donor was. But now, the goal was to prove that this boy, Jairaj, had been living with this family since childhood, since 2009. And if that was true, then surely there must be some scientific or technological way to establish that, yes, this is indeed the same Jairaj who lived in that house for 15 years. So the police officer began reading and researching. He was an SP who used his brain and started studying the subject in depth. As he read more, he came across information about how DNA from IVF cases can be traced and identified. During his research, he came across a book by an American forensic expert. The book was written as a detailed case study and was titled DNA Test in Criminal Investigation, Trial and Paternity Disputes, Justice Through Science. When he read that book, now, using the methods described in that book, he wrote a letter and sent it to the concerned local police station handling the case. He instructed them to follow certain steps, saying, if you do this, the matter will be clarified. But the local police station didn't take much action. By then, the SP officer who had been handling the case was transferred elsewhere. Meanwhile, the skeleton was still lying in the police station, and no conclusion had been reached. Frustrated, the parents went directly to the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. Before that, they also went to the High Court and filed a writ petition, stating that they still had no confirmation about their son's identity through DNA, nor had the police handed over the skeleton for final rites. So first they went to court, then to the Chief Minister. Finally, the High Court gave an order that regardless of the sample situation, the skeleton must be handed over to the parents so they could perform the last rites. For the first time after going to the High Court, an order was issued to balance the ongoing investigation with the emotional rights of the grieving parents. So, finally, the court ordered the police to hand over the skeleton to the parents. After Jayraj had gone missing, and after 13 long months on May 12, 2024, following the court's directive, the police handed over the skeleton to his parents. On May 12, 2024, the parents performed his last rites. That means the skeleton had been lying in police custody for a total of 13 months. After the cremation, the parents, who had already met the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, shared their entire ordeal with the new CM. Upon hearing everything, the Chief Minister's office sent strict instructions to the police via the DGP, asking, "What is this mess? Why has this case been handled so poorly? Solve it properly and find out the truth." Now, the SP who had studied the case earlier had already explained what kind of technique could help uncover the truth. With this fresh directive from the CM's office, the police were shaken. They decided to reopen and reinvestigate the case. They followed the method suggested by former SP. He had said, "Go to Jayraj's home and collect everything that belonged to him since childhood, anything that could hold his traces. This included his school ID cards, books, and even toys he played with when he was little. They even collected his toys. All these items were gathered. Once collected, everything was sent to the forensic lab in Chandigarh, with the instruction that there must be some biological traces left on these things, like sweat, saliva, hair, or pieces of nails, maybe stuck inside the bag or on other objects. The lab was told to extract DNA from those traces and compare it with the DNA from the skeleton, which hadn't matched the parents. So the idea was to match the DNA from the skeleton with whatever DNA they could retrieve from Jayraj's personal belongings. His bag, toys, nails, hair, whistle, or saliva. These items could contain biological evidence stored unintentionally over time. When all the collected items were examined in the forensic lab, they found samples, some nail fragments, strands of hair, and even sweat droplets that had dried into the fabric. Saliva traces were also found. All of these were tested and compared with the DNA sample from the skeleton. The result? Everything matched. This confirmed that the skeleton was indeed Jayraj's, because all those personal belongings belonged to Jayraj, and the DNA on them matched the skeleton exactly. That's why all of Jayraj's belongings and personal traces were found, and those traces matched the skeleton. So now there was no room left for doubt about whose skeleton it was. Once the DNA from the items matched, it became clear. The two previous DNA tests had failed only because Jayraj was a test tube baby, so his DNA couldn't match that of his parents. But his personal belongings, his toys, whistle, shoes, socks, and school bag, contained biological traces from his body, and they matched the skeleton exactly. Now that it was confirmed the skeleton was Jayraj's, one big question remained. Who killed Jayraj? The police began their investigation in that direction, as his identity was now confirmed. During the investigation, police found out that Jayraj was last seen with his cousin, his uncle's son. When the police questioned the cousin, he said that they used to play together often, and that he was teaching Jayraj how to ride a bike that day. Then the police spoke to Jayraj's father, Laxman, who revealed a new angle to the story. He explained that he owned a large amount of land and property. For many years after marriage, he and his wife had no children. He had a stepbrother named Dashrath, who had a son named Manvendra, Jayraj's cousin. There had been frequent arguments over the property, with Dashrath saying, "You two don't have any children, so give the property to my son, Manvendra." Laxman agreed at the time, and both sides assumed that since Laxman had no heirs, Manvendra would inherit everything. But deep down, Laxman and his wife still longed to become parents. That desire led them to Indore, where they tried IVF. After several attempts, they succeeded, and in 2009, Jayraj was born. When Jayraj was born, Dashrath and Manvendra realized that Laxman now had a legal heir. But they waited, thinking, let's see if this test tube baby even survives. As time went on, Jayraj grew up happy and healthy, and his parents loved him deeply. Slowly, as he grew older, Dashrath and Manvendra began to worry. If Jayraj became an adult, all the property would legally go to him, and they would get nothing. So they decided to kill him before he turned 18. And finally, on March 28th, under the pretense of taking him out for a ride, Manvendra took Jayraj along and strangled him to death. So this was today's story. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. We hope you enjoyed the content and found it valuable.